Hello out there in Guitar Moderne land. I hope you're all staying warm this winter. I've always felt a bit of pride in helping Oz Noy to launch his career, what's now at least maybe 20, over 20 years ago. In the early 2000s, when I was an editor at Guitar One magazine, I had a column called Super Unknown where I was allowed to write about any guitarists that I felt people should know about and didn't at the time. And Oz was playing down at the bitter end in New York, where I was living at the time, every Monday with various amazing rhythm sections. And I had this flash of discovery when I saw him, much like the first time I saw Bill Frisell in the same club. Here was somebody doing something really new with the instrument and someone who had the technique to do it. And so I wrote about him in that column, and I've done a couple of interviews with him over the years ever since. And I've just been so pleased to see the increase in his visibility and fame and his ability to tour all over the United States and the world with more amazing rhythm sections. It was great to talk to him. We reminisced a little bit about those days. We talked about his latest album, a live record with, a sort of live record with Dennis Chambers and Jimmy Haslip called Triple Play. We got to speak about the second Ozone Squeeze record, which I love. I got to see that band when they came through Nashville when I was living there before I moved to France. And we just had a good old time talking, and I hope you have a good old time watching. So here's my interview with Oz Noy. Oz Noy, great to see you
Hey.
again. Great to talk to you again. Um, the first thing I want to talk to you about is because having watched, of course, more stuff and listening to the record and having listened to you for, we were discussing almost 20 years now. One thing you do, and I've always tried to put my finger on it because you're an instrumental jazz player, but you seem to attract a wider audience than your usual instrumental jazz guitar player. And it's something that makes your music accessible as far out as you take it at times that I don't see in so many other players. And it's basic stuff. Like, for one thing, there's that call and response thing. I know you've talked about that before, where you play a lick and then you'll play chords as if you're accompanying yourself. And it gives the solo, the lines room to breathe and makes everything kind of more melodic and work better. And then there's the motif following that you do, where you'll play a lick, something, a melody thing, and then work it all the way up and down the neck and in all the different positions. But you're not afraid of repeating it, and for effect. I mean, it's a great effect, and I think it makes the music accessible. Where did you learn that stuff, and why did it stick with you? Because it is something everybody talks about, but so few people do.
Well, the thing about the motif, that's just jazz. You know what I mean? Like when you learn to play standards, then you play the standard and you want to kind of keep, it's not that you'll play the melody of the standard, but you want to kind of highlight still the song. So you want to highlight the harmony. And one way to do that is to kind of play a motif and move that motif around harmony. When a harmony is moving, like All the Things You Are or things like that, where you can kind of move it almost symmetrically, you know what I mean? So that's just one kind of tool out of the toolbox of bebop, you know what I mean? It's just one thing that the improvisers do in jazz. Like you take a certain motif and you kind of move it around. Because it also helps the ear to hear the harmony that way, instead of you playing all this like deep stuff that just kind of moves around over the harmony. So that all comes from jazz, really. And the thing about call and response, that's a general thing. I say that comes more from like piano players and even organ players, where they have the left hand. So, they can play something and their left hand kind of follows. It's like the left hand gives the color and the right hand plays the melody. Well, now with guitar, you can't, the only way you can do it is either you play the chord first and, like the left hand chord first and play the melody, or you do the opposite. You play the melody and then you play the chord. So it's like, it all comes from pretty much piano or organ, really. And it's basically, you know, if I had three hands and the third hand could do it could do it at the same time that I played the lick, it would be cool. But I think the fact that you play the chord before or after, it still makes the same effect because it gives the listener like the idea of the harmony still. You know what I mean? And also it's got a rhythmical effect too. Because if you listen to piano players, even like Art Tatum or somebody like that, Bud Powell, a lot of it, like there's a lot of rhythmical effect to the left hand, to the chord stuff, you know. So that also makes a difference. So I think it's both things together, you know.
Yeah, and of course it does that, and it also, as I was saying before, it lets the melody breathe, so it isn't a it isn't
Exactly.
a you know, the lines are not a string of lines. I mean, speaking of breathing, I mean that's one thing, guitar players don't have to breathe like horn players, so
Yeah.
a lot of them have a tendency to play through the breaths,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that can really make the audience uncomfortable in a way that they
Fatigue.
don't realize why. You
Yeah.
know, whereas when you do leave that space, it lets them breathe along with you, and it
Yeah.
really brings them in. Plus, I mean, the way you go back and forth between the harmony, the chords, and the lines is so seamless that it almost feels like you're playing them at the same time. I mean, the only other way to do it would be that, like Stanley Jordan, to be tapping, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't know, you
It's
just
like
don't.
poor man's comping while soloing, you know what I mean? It's like I don't know how else he could do that, really.
Well, and as you've said also elsewhere, for the comping, you use your rotary speaker thing a lot,
Leslie, yeah.
to sound like you'll kick that on just for the comping so that it sounds like an organ. You use a
Yeah.
lot of different modulations, and I want to ask you, you know, how you choose which modulation to use at any given point.
But what do you mean by module? The only
Well,
module.
I mean, you use tremolo, you
Oh
use
yeah, yeah.
phasing, you use univibe, you use vibrato.
Yeah, well, the Leslie is the main thing, and that's the thing that I use for the comping thing, you know. And I also use it when if the bass plays a solo, then I'll use in the background. I don't know. Sometimes it sounds more like an organ than guitar, so I kind of and it's got a weird kind of spread to it that I like. Univibe I use mostly if I want that kind of Hendrix thing, you know. And there's sections in the songs where I go for that, so I add that. Tremolo is interesting. The soft tremolo that I use more on like, you know, on like ballads or stuff that I want the sound to be a little softer because it just give a different dimension than that kind of in your face guitar. Even if you put delay on a guitar or reverb, it's still kind of in your face, and tremolo kind of like it's erased the attack a little bit, so it makes it sound a little more spacious, you know.
Yeah.
Um, Phaser, when I use phaser, it's more for just like funky stuff. It's just like rhythm. I love like I don't know who's doing the, you know, like Wawa Watson mostly play with a Wawa, but all those Herbie things from the 70s, there's usually something, the electric guitar stuff, there's usually something on it, either phaser or so that's kind of what I'm going for, really.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I want to talk about that whole 70s thing too. But first, let's talk about the fuzz thing, because the octafuzz thing,
Yeah.
because you're one of the few guys I've ever seen, and people tend to, and I at first also, when I first encountered octafuzz, it seemed like the received wisdom was that, okay, you put on the neck pickup, you maybe even roll your tone off, and then you play the octafuzz, so you really get that octave coming through. But
Yeah.
you're one of the only other people, I think I discovered it independently, that figured out how you can make it sound like an electric sitar. And
Yeah.
I know how I do it, but how do you do it?
I just, I'm not, I think you have to be on the bridge pickup. It works better, but you turn the volume of the guitar down to the point where it starts to sound like that. It's like there's a kind of a sweet spot there, you know? So it's basically the volume on the guitar down, and it helps to put some kind of delay or reverb on it. Otherwise, it's very dead, like, because there's not a lot of sustain to it all the
Right.
time, you know?
Yeah,
So,
I do the same thing. And I love that sound.
and also there's another thing because I know some guys that play an octafuzz, they don't use a lot of gain. Like I know Scott Henderson put the gain to 0, I think. And I think, and that wouldn't work. Like you have to put some gain on the pedal. You know, it has to have some of the gain on there to kind of make it happen.
Yeah, that gives it some of those kind of overtones, like
Yeah,
a
exactly. Yeah,
guitar that
yeah,
works. And you
yeah.
also use it kind of like a ring modulator, like getting the rub against different
Yeah.
notes.
I haven't done that in a long time actually, but I used to do it more. Yeah, you kind of put the neck pickup and you kind of play two notes and they kind of rub. I haven't done it in a while though. I don't, maybe I have, but I can't, I don't
Well,
think
I
about
think I just saw you kind of demonstrated it on the Anderson's video. I think when you
Oh
were
yeah, 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 yeah,
showing
yeah.
your thing, and you
Yeah.
just happened to do it. So in terms of pedals, I was curious, do you look do you just try out new pedals and keep ones that inspire you, or do you have a sound in your head and you look for pedals that can create that sound?
It's a very good question. I don't try a lot of pedals. Once in a while, if something really interests me, I'll try it. But to be totally honest, I always end up with the first same three things that just work best for me, and I can't find anything that works better. So it's like if I want a different sound, yes, but in general, like my lead sound is two things. It's my I have my signature exotic pedal, that AC/RC Oz pedal, which is basically an AC RC booster and an AC booster in one pedal. And that's pretty much my main sound. It's like the RC is mostly on, and then when you put the AC, it gives you like this big lead tone. And then the other thing is if I want to use like a kind of, if I'm doing something that's more bluesy, then I'll use like a TS-808 because it's got less mid-range. And that's it. Like the Octavia is another thing, and then I have a fuzz that Vemura made me. It's like and it's a signature fuzz, and that I don't use much, but I use it sometimes. Um, Sometimes on ballads, when you want to kind of, yeah, like you take the volume down and it's really cool, clean tone, then you push it up. It's like that fuzz thing, but it's not super fuzzy, so it's kind of, it gets a really nice kind of in the middle kind of clean tone. But I don't know. I don't really find many like I have a few other pedals that line around, but I end up not using them much, because that stuff works.
Yeah, well, you've been using, I mean, I noticed going back over your stuff, you've been using essentially, yes, the same sounds, a lot of the same sounds for a long time. I mean, you might switch the brand,
Yeah.
of a pedal that gets it. And, you use the line 6 stuff for
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
sounds, but a lot of the similar sounds that you've been using. But
I want to say so, my goal, if you put a TS-808, then you get that kind of mid-rangey kind of thing, like that bluesy thing. So that's one thing, and it's very specific. But my main goal, especially with my pedal, is I want the same tone that I have clean to just be amplified, and it's really hard because a lot of pedals, once you put gain, it completely changes the color of the tone. And the only company that I know that when they came out, it was revolutionized. Then the whole thing was exotic because their pedals are really transparent. So it's kind of the only pedals that I found that are, especially the RC, that is so transparent. And then when you add the gain to it, it always changes something. But I'm always trying to find the most transparent pedal to the guitar. You know what I mean? Because
yeah,
there's a
I
lot
know
of great.
exactly what you mean. I mean, that's how your own sound comes through, first of all.
Yeah.
But just since we're talking about that, I should throw in that I discovered a while back. Have you ever tried Jetter pedals?
No.
You might want to check them out because I've been using his pedals for a long time. He makes a dual kind of boost pedal.
Yeah. I'll
And the
check it.
reason I use it is because to me, it sounds the most transparent. It just sounds like me, only louder or a little gainier. It sounds like
Really?
the guitar
What
on
is
the
it, cheddar?
Jetter, Jetter. Yeah. I mean,
Really?
it may work for you, it may not, but I've been going, for years, that's all I've been using. Because I
Really?
even the RC pedals, I love, they sound amazing, but they have this kind of LA sound to them
Exactly, yeah.
that all of a sudden to me was a coloration that I wasn't looking for. It's like the
Most,
Zen,
most,
the
yeah,
Zen vibe
most,
sounds amazing. What's that?
yeah. Most pedals from the beginning, it's an effect. They have an effect. It sounds like an effect. It doesn't sound like it's cool, like, you know, like have a OD1 or all that stuff, you know, like old overdrives or distortion pedals. Um, you know, they sound like a different thing. They just sound really great, you know. You know, the way to get the way to get like a really pure tone is to pretty much crank the amp and get everything out of the amp, but then it makes things so complex with effects. I've tried to do stuff with in the loop stuff, but it's so complex, you know. It's like, so it's almost like if you commit to the gain from the amp, it's very hard to use pedals on top of that, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, which brings us, I mean, to the amps, which you use. I mean, lately you've been using Two Rock, which makes perfect sense because you were largely a Fender guy, you
Yeah,
know, since I know you, between the basement heads and you know, the odd super here and there or a twin,
yeah,
but which, you know, are all great pedal platforms.
yes,
But I was curious because I've also seen you occasionally use a Marshall,
yeah.
there's also a video of you playing through a couple of Voxes, and Marshalls and Voxes. Well, Marshall's closer to a Fender, you know. I mean, it's actually originally, I guess, was a souped up Fender, but Voxes are a very different sound that I've never been able to, you know, if you want the Beatles sound or you want a very specific sound, but you seem to use them and still get your sound out of them. And I was
The
curious.
only reason I use Voxes is because, well, first of all, I have an old Vox now, so it's a total different animal than the Voxes that I use in videos and stuff. The only reason I use Voxes is because at a certain point, I thought they were the most consistent for rentals, you know, but those Voxes do not sound anything like the old ones, like they have that shimmery kind of like classic tone. So it was just, I thought it would be a good platform to clean tone that will react well. The ones that are English made from the 90s are still pretty good because they got volume and they're clean and you get a decent tone. But I got off that. It's they got less and less consistent, you know what I mean? So it was, I never owned a Vox till lately that I own this. Even the one that I have now, the vintage one that I have now, I don't use it for anything except for maybe recordings, you know? So most of what I play is I have the Two Rock, either a TS1 or classic reverb. I used to use Marshalls all the time. I still have my Marshalls. I just don't have much situations to use them right now. And if I have a small gig, I'll use a Fender Deluxe or two Fender Deluxes. And actually now when I tour, if I need rentals, I ask for two Fender Deluxes.
Yeah, well, apparently the new ones, the new reissues are really good.
They're good and they're consistent, you know what I mean? I've done, the last two tours I've done was with that, and it's the most consistent stuff that I got because they pretty much sound the same. They're normally in good condition. They're kind of newish. They don't have a super exotic tone, but they sound nice, you know, so it's good enough.
Well, I guess that answers my next question. I was going to ask you, because you do a fair amount of European touring, would it make sense, or do you keep anything over there, like a pedal board or an amp?
No, pedal board, no. I don't do that much European touring, but I was thinking for next year actually to leave something there. Because it's still, as much as the rental stuff is okay, man, when I play with like a Two Rock or a good amp, it's such a huge difference. I remember we were on tour, the last tour we did in the US, and every time I played my Two Rock, Dennis was like, wow, you know, it's like it's such a big difference that it's, so I'm probably gonna leave a Two Rock in Europe, you
Oh.
know.
So going back a bit, because we haven't talked in a while, how did you deal with the COVID years? What were you doing?
Well, the interesting thing was, you know, it sucked like it sucked for everybody, but what happened that was interesting is after about 3 months, I think it started in May, in March, correct? So in June, when you were able to start going outside, I called two friends of mine from the neighborhood. You know Ray Marchica, drummer?
I know he was playing with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and Ogano Okwego is a really good bass man. We went to the park, to Riverside Park, and we used to play there like 3-4 times a week. So that's what saved my chops and my head. and we did it for about till it got cold. So we did for about 4 months. And then when it got cold, we went in the studio and recorded a jazz album. We recorded this trio album called Riverside. And it was just me playing standards. It's actually the first time I recorded myself playing standards with a clean tone. So that was that. And then after that, was sitting at home for a while. And then in the spring, it started to open up. So I started to play again. And it was, like little drops, like a gig at the bitter end here and there. But it worked out okay. I did a lot of recordings from home, which was great. Teaching too. I don't know. It's kind of funny. Things start to slow down when COVID started to go away.
Well, I mean, did you really pick up the teaching thing, the remote teaching thing because a lot of guys did. I mean, that seemed to the people who could do it. And
the greatest thing that happened to me from COVID is this. I did the teaching thing online, but I've done a series of online master classes. I did about 11 of them, and they were really well attended. I did it on Zoom, but I recorded them because I really made master classes. I wrote everything, and I recorded them, and now I have this online store, and they're on the store for sale because they're an hour and change masterclass with a lot of information. So that was like the greatest thing that happened from the pandemic.
Well, yeah, I mean, that seems to have happened for a lot of the guys who could do it. It really seems to have become a new income stream for a lot of them, a lot of them into education and online stuff like that. Well, let's talk about the Riverside record, because that's a great record, and it's a whole the other side of Oz Noy. I mean, that's where everybody can see what you come out of, basically, and that it's not all about the effects, and it's not it's not necessarily the Stevie Ray Vaughan and Hendrix stuff. I mean, you have that firm foundation in bebop. What were you using for an amp, and how were you powering it out in the
I used a Roland stage amp. It's those street stage amp, I still have it. I played this bar in New York. I still use it. I love it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I use that with batteries when I was playing outside. The good thing about this amp, at least the way I use it, it's very flat. It doesn't have any character or anything. So if you want that kind of dead jazz sound, like that flat jazz sound, you just plug the guitar in and it's there. So when we recorded the album, I used that, and I used the Princeton. But I think most of the sound was more like that Roland amp.
And were you using that Duo Jet for outside, or were you?
I used when I play outside, I brought different guitars all the time. When I did the album, I used the Duo Jet on half of the album and a Strat on the other half, and I wish I used the Duo Jet on the whole thing, because the stuff with the Strat doesn't sound good.
What's the thing about the Duo Jet? You and Julian Lage both seem to get.
It's such a great instrument. It's just the tone is just beautiful, because it doesn't sound like a hollow body guitar, but it's got depth, and it could sound really round and kind of funky too.
Yeah, well, it's got those pickups. I mean, the only thing about, was it an old one or a reissue?
It's a master build. It's a Steven Stern master build.
Okay,
it's an amazing guitar. It's one of the best guitars I own,
Yeah, because the old ones old Gretsch's can be really funky in terms of playability.
No, this thing is solid as a rock. Like, it's really solid.
Yeah. Well, it sounds great. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that record. Like all the things that you are seems to, especially in a video version, I think, is that where like your Jim Hall influences were coming out? Because I hear a lot of.
Well, I grew up on all that stuff. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'm not necessarily going for that. And to be totally honest, I still feel that sound is limiting me, because it's a very, like, you don't get much back with that kind of sound. When you put an overdrive or something, it's almost like you get more air, So I kind of found ways to compensate. I think a big part of it is just volume. If you have enough volume, then you still move air. But again, it's like some of the tones, it's a lot more revealing, and it's like harder to, I guess it's to articulate and stuff like that, just because it's I think with an overdrive, it just gives you an extra push, you know what I mean? You don't have to work as hard and the notes kind of come out easier.
Well, guitarists have been looking for that. I mean, it's that kind of horn effect. It gives you more sustain.
Exactly,
You know,
yeah.
I mean, Charlie Christian actually was overdriving his amp a little. That's why
Yeah,
he sounds so much better than a lot of the guys who came after him, who started playing through much cleaner amps,
exactly.
bigger
So there
amps.
is a reason for that. Yeah, but Jim Hall was a massive influence. Actually, to be honest, I was a total, like Wes Montgomery freak. I was listening to Jim Hall, but I was a Wes Montgomery clone. And the way I got out of it was at some point, I was like, okay, enough with the Wes thing. And a way out of it, and I think a way out of it for a lot of guitar players in general and jazz was Jim Hall, because he really opened up the doors to some other like different approaches. Like I think Bill Frisell is the most perfect example of what Jim Hall did to the jazz world.
Well, yeah, it's a whole generation. I mean, I think Abercrombie was influenced, and
Abercrombie, yeah,
John and Schofield, all those
yeah,
guys were
yeah,
they were the post. I mean, they were all, of course, influenced by Wes. Who wasn't? I mean, how could
yeah,
you not be? But yeah,
yeah,
I think he turned that generation's head around.
yeah.
Um, the what inspired you to slow down Billy's bounce and play it like that?
I don't know. Nothing really. I think what happens with me that's interesting is sometimes sometimes I do gigs where I just play standards. Like I have a friend of mine that owns a wine bar, so sometimes I go and play there. So nobody's really like people, it's not a listening room, we just play. So a lot of the times it happened to me also like that when I recorded the Evidence by Thelonious Monk, when I did it slow. Sometimes during a gig, something comes up and I don't know, I start playing it really slow and I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting. And you go for it and then either it works or not. In this case, it just did.
Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, it's funny when I was trying to learn Charlie Parker stuff. I didn't have the chops to play it up to speed,
Yeah,
and a lot of his stuff and a lot of his licks, they kind of don't make sense if you play them slow. They only make
yeah,
sense if you play them up to speed. But
yeah,
that, I don't know, somehow you turn out, especially the video version, it becomes like this country,
yeah,
Dwayne Eddy ballad, and
yeah, yeah,
it's fantastic. It sounds amazing.
yeah.
I guess that's where the duo jet comes in, because
Yeah.
you got the
Well,
lounge.
I recorded it. We did it on the live album too, which is it's a little bit of a different sound, but it's still kind of slow.
So where's the piano comping coming from on Sunny?
Oh, on a Riverside on
Yeah.
Sunny, it comes in from that's the only song that I asked Clifford Carter, my friend, to comp. I just think it sounded a little empty to me. Just because it's a straight groove, it doesn't go anywhere. It sounded a little empty. So I was like, hey man, can you fill it up a little bit?
Yeah, I used to see him play with the 23rd Street Band back
Yeah, of
in
course, with
Hiram.
Hiram.
Were you in town when those guys were around?
No, I wish no.
Yeah, yeah,
26, 20, yeah, 20, yeah.
yeah. So you play various Strats, Tellys, Les Pauls. I saw 335, the Duo Jet, and you have such precise technique. And I know sometimes when I switch guitars, it's I have to get used to a new feel. But
Yeah.
I mean, do you have to do some shedding on a new guitar to get comfortable with it to where you can play
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, but for me it's not, it's a different, it's like now for me to play a Strat or a Tele, it doesn't make any difference. I can either I don't have a problem, but I remember it took me about a year to get used to a Tele. It's something that you gotta, it's more, to me it's not the shape of the guitar, it's the way the sound reacts. So with the Les Paul, I have a Les Paul and I've been playing Les Pauls on and off for years, but it's still always a struggle for me. And the struggle is not the way it feels as much as the way the sound reacts. So that's the big thing. Gretsch, the Duo Jet, you need to get used to it for a little bit because of the way, I think the way the neck, how it sits on the body or something, it sits in a different place. So the Gretsch takes me a minute. I have to play on it for a day or two or do a gig or two. But in general, it's more about the sound than the way the guitar feels. Like the way the sound react makes a big difference for me.
Sure, that makes sense. I
Yeah,
mean, in the time I've known you, also you've been through a whole lot of Strats. Uh,
yeah,
I was curious, what makes you move from one to the next? I mean, are
I
you
found
looking
better ones.
for? Okay, so each one you feel is better than the one before.
Yeah, I've been using now. I have a John Cruz master build that he built me. That's the main one. That's the one that I use on the live album. And I have a Jason Smith Strat master build that is a maple one that I use a bunch too. And those guitars are just better than any other Strats that I own. That's pretty much what it is. They're just better. I still have my red custom shop Strat. That's a very good guitar too. I use it sometimes, but those are the main ones. Those are basically my main Strat. Same thing with my tellies. Like I changed a bunch of tellies, but I have a master build John Cruz telly that I used on the live album, and I have a master build um, uh, Jason Smith, and they're just much better guitars than the custom shops that I had.
So, so I mean, master build and Fender is a step above custom shop. Is that the way it works?
For me, that's how it worked out. They're just I would change Strats sometimes because I would find a better one in a store, and I was like, oh, that's better than mine, and I compare them. But then once I get the custom shop soaps, it just was much better than what I had. So it's not even a question.
Right, right. So yeah, the original one was the red one with the big headstock.
Yeah, I still have that one. I use that.
And the new one, the Cruise one is that the blue one with the
Yeah,
red?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So we also never got a chance to talk about the second Ozone Squeeze record, which
I know, man. Shit.
I mean, that's the last time I saw you was probably with that gig in Nashville with the original band. But when
Wow.
the new one came out, I'm wondering. I knew Sarah. What's her last name?
Limits.
Yeah, from which I also wanted to talk to you about the Scary Pockets thing.
Scary Pockets. Yeah, that's where I met her.
That's what I figured. So how did she end up in the band?
What happened? Oh, here's another good thing that happened during COVID. So what happened was about in 2018, we finished a little tour for that first album. And then we went to the studio that we recorded the first one. I was like, let's try to get in and jam and try to write for next one. So we did it. I had a drive that was sitting in my house for like 2 years or more. And we couldn't find, every once in a while, I'll listen to it. I was like, well, there's a couple of good things here, but somebody needs to write songs on it and I have to edit it. So we tried to get together again and it just didn't work. And then after 2 years, we said, okay, April 2020, we set up a date to go in the studio, and then we had to cancel it, obviously. So at that point, I was sitting at home and I was like, fuck it. So I opened the drive and I started to edit it because there was some cool stuff there. And I also came up with some covers that I thought will be cool. And I started doing demos or edit what I had. And right before the pandemic, I was in LA and I did one of those Scary Pocket sessions. So Sarah was on it. So I start following her and I really liked what she was doing. I was like, wow, she's really good. So when I had a little bit during the pandemic, I started to have a couple of tunes that sounded like you can also already write on them or sing, So I called her. I was like, hey, would you be down to write on this one track that turned into this song Wavelength? And then maybe I had 1 or 2 covers that I wanted to see how they sound. Would you be okay? And so she was into it, and that's how it started. So once she starts singing on the stuff, and she wrote that one song, the Wavelength song, then it seems that I started to have an album, So we kept kind of working on it, and then I was always in touch with Ray and Darren, and as soon as we had a possibility to go in the studio when COVID was slowing down, we did. And at that point, I asked Sarah, I was like, do you have originals that we can record? So she sent me a bunch, and I chose that one song of her, The Deeming, which is an amazing song.
Yeah, it's great. I can't get it out of my head.
I know, it's like a classic. And then the same with Ray. I was like, hey man, do you have anything? So he sent a bunch, and there was that song, I Got You, So at that point, it started to sound, okay, it looks like we have a record. And then I came up with one original, like, instrumental, So that's what was going on. That's how it all came together. And then we went into a studio in New York for like 3 days, and we recorded all the new stuff, and we finished or overdubbed on the old stuff that I already had, and that was it. It took me 5 years to finish this thing.
Well, then, yeah, you did a really kind of brief tour with it. At that point, I was hoping it was going to come to Nashville.
I know the problem is the Ray is really busy, so we're gonna do some more next year, but it's kind of a very problematic situation because we can't. The Ray is just too busy to do tours, you know. So it's like here and there we have to find little pockets and do stuff. That's pretty much what it's gonna be right now.
Right. Well, I don't know. Twice in a while, it sounds like you're using the. I guess you use the plus pedal to hold chords.
Yeah.
What did you? Is there a reason you like that better than the freeze or what the Super Ego?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the freeze I sometimes use, but the problem for me was with the freeze is it just sounds like a waveform. It just sounds it doesn't sound like any character. So the plus, except of the fact that it's got two volumes, you can control the volume a little bit. I put in the loop of it, I put a Leslie, so it doesn't sound, or a chorus, so it doesn't sound like that kind of wave thing, like that thing. It sounds more like an organ or something like that. That's why I use it.
Well, yeah, the Super Ego version of the freeze.
I know that that's the same thing, but I tried and it was kind of messing up the tone a little bit. So
it's a different sound. Yeah, it's definitely a different sound. I think the wave guys, they've got something there.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Oh yeah, is that you soloing on Rainbow Tree?
Yeah.
What the hell is that?
It's what's the called the pedal? Hold on, I'll tell you what it's called. I forgot the name of it. It's the ZVAX Fuzz Factory.
Oh, the Fuzz Factory. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's the Oz Noy we know and love, you know. I mean, because
I never used that pedal except of that solo. I would do the same thing with an Octavia, but I thought it would be cooler to do it with that because it's just like so random, you know.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's a crazy pedal. Yeah, because on a lot of the other stuff, I mean, it's terrific, but you know, you're playing your pop guitar playing and it's great. But and then the other place you take it out of all places on the Neil Young song, you know.
Yeah.
Break Your Heart.
That's my greatest solo I ever played.
What is that?
That's like my pride and joy, that solo. You know, I have this thing on my line 6. I had those settings for a long time. So basically I have that fast. I have all these weird delays. I have like reverse delay. I have this what is it called? A sweep echo. Right. All that kind of stuff that sounds very psychedelic. But I have a patch that it's kind of like a ring modulator, but it's called a frequency something.
Analyzer?
Something like that. It's a patch on the line 6, something frequency. Yeah, I think frequency analyzer or something like that. And then the other thing I have is the pattern tremolo. So both of them are kind of random-ish. So what I do is I've been doing it. It's not only on this solo, I do it on my gigs too. I turn them on and off randomly. So, you know, you can play a note and then suddenly you have like, or you play a note and suddenly you go like, ooh, you know, that kind of shit. So that solo was pretty much me fucking around with the pedals while I'm soloing.
The funny thing is, I would imagine Neil Young would totally approve since he's, I mean, his playing.
Send it to him.
What's that?
Send it to him.
Yeah. I'd be curious.
Actually, we're doing a video for that one. When that one comes out, I would like to send it to him because I'm very proud of this track. I thought that was.
Well, it's a great version of the tune, and you know, I mean, his. I used to have to defend his guitar playing to other guitar players, you know, who thought, "Oh, this guy."
It's got a vibe, man. Shit.
Oh man, it's like Coltrane sheets of sound. I mean,
yeah, and the tones are great.
Amazing sound. So that's why I thought it'd be cool. So let's talk about the new record. On Chocolate Souffle.
Yeah.
Wait, is that the one? Yeah, it's a shuffle, but at one point you are doing something like dragging the beat behind the beat.
Yes. That's the melody of Chocolate Souffle is very catchy, But if you play it right in time, which I used to do, it's a little boring. It sounds even a little cheesy. And years ago, when I used to have that band with Adam Nussbaum, the band called Band, B-A-N-N.
Yeah, yeah.
We used to play this tune. I rewrote it since, but when we started playing live, I used to start stretching like I'm playing the melody kind of behind the beat, and it started to have a vibe. So over the years, then I started to play it with my own band, but I just like slowly played it more and more and more behind the beat. That's pretty much what happened. I like, it's kind of like, you know, now it's like a popular thing, like that whole like D'Angelo thing and the whole thing.
Bingo. I was going to
But
bring that up.
But I've done this way before. I've done this stuff like years ago. I've done it even on my first solo album on the song Ha, I'm playing the melody way behind the beat.
Yeah. Well, it's
So
that Dilla thing, you know.
Dilla thing, yeah. I wasn't aware of him at all till lately, but you know.
Well, I mean, you both discovered that if everybody, I mean, you're playing, essentially, you're not playing on a grid, but you are playing on the grid in time at that point. And, you know, Dennis is playing, or whoever the drummer is playing on the grid in a different space. But as long as both of you are playing it perfectly in time, it has this vibe and it has this thing.
It doesn't always happen because they keep time all the time. I have moments where it's really good, where I kind of drag it right in the right place, where it goes back in the right time. Then it's magical. Sometimes it's a little too much or a little too less. Then you go like, it doesn't always happen. But the idea is just like you kind of, people ask me, do you do any metric modulation? I was like, no, I'm just playing it way behind. That's all.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, that's another one I can't get out of my head. In my head, I'm hearing that behind the beat thing. Well, you know, I mean, you knew Michael Rhodes, right? You know,
yeah, very well. I used to play with him all the time. I love it.
Yeah, I think I saw one of your gigs down in Nashville, and he played with Pat McLaughlin, you know, this great singer-songwriter, rocker, R&B guy, and with Kenny Greenberg and
yeah, all the cats.
They used to do that on one of the tunes where they would, you know, they would, while Kenny was soloing, Pat and Michael would drag the beat behind the drummer. It was, and a lot of times they would also like bend over together and like old men, and it was.
Wow. Well, now there's the whole R&B thing. It's a whole sound of music that's how they play, where they think they drag the hi-hat or something, or they play the snare behind the beat. It's really great, you know.
Yeah, well, like everything else, you know, Dilla programmed it, and then all these drummers grew up listening to it and learned how to play it, you know.
Yeah.
Which is nothing they would have ever thought of on their own. On Snapdragon, I'm is perhaps manic depression influenced.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. You know what Snapdragon is based on Black Narcissus. That's the Joe Henderson tune.
Okay.
It's the same changes. I just wrote a different melody.
And threw the lick in.
Yeah. So if you listen to Black Narcissus, how do you go? Narcissus?
Black Narcissus, yeah.
Narcissus, the Joe Henderson version. He plays it slow, but it's exactly the same changes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
On Zigzag, it sounds like you step on a pedal somewhere in the middle of the headline. Like the sound changes somewhere in the middle as you're going up on that headline, the line on the head. Either it's more reverb or an octave comes in or something.
Oh, it's delay. It's that boo boo. I put an echo on those lines. Yeah, it's like a lot of echo. Yeah, because on the album there was there was kind of an question answer. I would play pam pam titi, and like everybody would answer, like the keyboard, the drum, the bass. So it was kind of stupid to try to do it live. So I just made it like I put an echo, so it just repeats it like it's a question and answer thing.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems like a lot of your effects, it seems like you just step on it for one part of the.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So is that record from one show, or is it a compilation of a couple of shows put together?
We did 2 nights at this place called Stages in Baltimore. It's in Coxville. So we did 2 nights, and we recorded 4 we recorded 2 shows and 2 sound checks. So I had, and the sound check had people in there. So it was basically 4 shows. So I had 4 shows to choose from, you know? And there's some edits, but it's mostly, you know, it's very limited amount of edits. But, you know, I may take, if I was lucky enough, if it was not full takes, then I may take a section from one night and another section from another night. But it's all live. It's like, you know, because there's no click or anything, so it's hard to edit that stuff anyhow, and there's leakage everywhere. So, but I was able to choose the best takes. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, so let's talk about Dennis Chambers.
Sure.
You've played with, I mean, you know, I know you have trouble getting good drummers, but you've played with Steve Ferroni and Vinnie Colaiuta and Anton Fig and Keith Garlock. I'm always curious, what's different about playing? What does Dennis bring that's uniquely his?
Well, first of all, I played with Weckl. Weckl was the guy that I toured with the most. So for about 11 years, we toured, you know. What every drummer has a different approach and a different groove. That's the main thing, and a different sound. So it's almost like certain drummers kind of they have their, it's not that they're strong at everything, but they kind of, there's certain kind of pockets that highlights them best, you know what I mean? So I think for over the years when I was writing the albums, I was always thinking about what drummer is going to play on it, you know? And there's great grooves that, you know, Anton plays, great grooves that Keith plays, great grooves that are Weckl or Dennis or Vinny or whoever. But it's just a different, if with each drummer, the sound of the band just changes to the drummer's style, you know what I mean? So I try to play tunes that kind of fit him the best, actually. And Dennis is very, you know, he can really do anything, like really, you know, there's not a lot of people that can really do anything, but he's one of them. So, but his pocket, and especially his funk pocket from the, you know, like the funkadelic days, is so strong. So I wasn't really bringing funk tunes, but I was bringing tunes that I thought are open enough that he can go wherever he wants with, you know, with like that kind of, it's at the end of the day, his pocket is what it is and his style is what it is, but it's all about like your natural instincts, you know what I mean? And every drummer has different instincts on this music, you know, so it will go different places with everybody.
Yeah,
so
it must be inspiring for you too. I mean, you're playing the
yeah, of course,
song, but it becomes something new because
absolutely, yeah. That's the whole thing about this band, about the tunes that I write, because to me those tunes are kind of like standards. So you can kind of, there are parts and there are that identify to the song, but even like Zigzag or any of those tunes, they have a certain kind of groove, but every drummer that will play will sound different because they will play those grooves a little different, and how they open up in the open sections or in the solos, that's the instincts that each of those guys have in a different way, you know? And the other thing about Dennis is, it's a general thing actually, is we started to play kind of more regularly right before the pandemic, and then everything stopped. So he played on my the Snapdragon album. He played on a couple of tracks, and then we did a European tour. And before that, we did another thing. But when we were able to get back to playing, so I was like, "Hey guys, let's start playing again." When COVID was loosened up, so we did a few tours. And the reason I decided to do this album is because we did a tour in Europe, and I was like, okay, we did a few tours in the US, and then we did a tour in Europe, and I was like, okay, this is, the band kind of sounds hot now, you know, like it's at the right place. Because every time there's a point where you get here and then it starts to go down, you know, and then it's so I told them, I kind of forced them, I was like, hey, let's record this before it goes away, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So then I pretty much forced them. We finished the tour in Europe, I think in November, and I told them we got to do it now before the end of the year, otherwise it ain't gonna happen. So by the end of the year, between Christmas and New Year's, I just forced them. I was like, let's go for 2 days and do this. And we did it, you know.
Well, it came out great. I mean,
Thank you.
It sounds
and also that's the thing, like because the approach was there, you know, like everybody knew what they were doing, and we had a sound. And again, with the whole thing with it's not only with drums, with bass, it's like the natural instinct, you know, everybody knew what to do with the music, you know what I mean? And it was kind of gelling nicely, because a lot of times it doesn't matter who you're playing with, it takes time for the stuff to gel.
Well, yeah, and now I know what you mean, because it gets to that point where it gels and you want to do it before it gets stale, you know,
Exactly, yeah.
and just you know, becomes rote and stuff. I've
Yeah,
heard that Dennis doesn't read. Is
it
that
doesn't really, no.
so? He had to learn all that stuff just from.
Yeah, but that stuff, especially now that of the stuff that I'm playing, it's not that hard, you know. It's not like, if you listen to it, I don't think there's any tune there that's really hard. Like that, you know, I used to write in the beginning, I used to write some tunes that were tricky. This stuff is pretty, you know, it's based on groove stuff, and I don't know, there is a little kicks here and there and stuff, but in general, it's pretty simple stuff, I think, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I mean, and he's learned more complicated stuff.
You know, way more playing with McLaughlin. Come on, I'm like a Britney Spears complaining, like a pop version of that, you know. So
I think
yeah,
I wrote you about that. I wrote about you saying your stuff isn't complicated, but who was it? Some famous guitar player was talking about your version of Sissy Strut, and
yeah.
they thought it was in a weird time
No,
also.
it's in 4/4. I just moved one of the lines, like an 8 note or something. I don't know.
I know, but
You know, for
I felt so much better because I'm going, oh, this guy's he's a serious guitar player, and he thought it was weird. Also, he
you
thought
know,
it.
Ferroni, I always had, me and Ferroni, we always have this joke, because Ferroni always goes like, oh, your shit is complicated. I was like, no, it's not. And in the beginning, when I used to play with him, I called him to play. He goes like, yeah, but I don't know if I can do it. It's complicated. And I was like, man, I'll come to your place. I'll show it to you. You'll see that it's not. So at the time, actually, we played a couple of things that were a little more involved, but it's always like, you know, once you show somebody what it is, you go like, oh, okay, that's all it is, you know. So
I think he was the one actually that said he thought it was in a different time signature.
yeah. So I don't know. It's kind of weird. Like, also, you'll be surprised of how, you know, I've seen it now because I play with so many different drummers and bass players, but especially drummers. You'll be surprised sometimes from what throws drummers off, you know, or the opposite of how they can grab complex stuff that'll go like, oh wow, that was easy, you know. So yeah, I don't know. You never know.
So what's next for Oz Noy?
I'm doing a jazz quartet album for Crisscross Records next year, and I'm really, really excited about it. People don't really know it because I never recorded jazz albums till Riverside, but I've been playing jazz gigs and playing standards the whole time before I moved to New York, but definitely in New York. I just was kind of looking and searching to see what works for me, you know, because as obviously my sound is not quite, you know, the obvious jazz thing. And also I wanted to find stuff and approaches that will work. So over the years, I used to, the 55 bar were always jazz gigs that I played. So now I'm doing this thing for Crisscross, and it's going to be a quartet with David Kikowski and Jeff Dane Watts and John Benitez, and it's all standards. But you know, I have arrangements and different kind of approaches for that. But I'm really excited about that. I'm going to do that next year.
Are you going to be playing with a straight tone, or are you going to be using effects in your?
It's going to be pretty. It's going to be pretty. I don't know yet. It's a good question. I would probably play with a straight tone with some effects. You know, the thing is with the Crisscross thing is their record has a certain sound to them. So, and I always wanted to kind of do that thing, you know. So I'm not necessarily going to put a distortion, or I don't use distortion, but an overdrive on my guitar, you know.
Well, I can't wait to hear it. I loved your versions of these standards, and it was some of my favorite standards. I mean,
yeah, so
something big. Nobody does that.
Yeah. That's
anymore.
So that's coming up, and then there are hopefully gonna be some Ozone Squeeze dates. tour dates, not a lot, but some. Then I'm supposed to go to Europe next year with an organ trio with Gary Novak and Brian Charette. So I don't know. I'm looking for new stuff, new things to do, you know.
Well, great. I'll be following whatever it is. And then when you come to Europe, if you get south to France,
Yeah, man.
I'll hopefully be able to check you out. And thanks for doing this. And hope everybody.